have to do what yourself? No, you're not going to introduce yourself. No way. Come on and get a seat, folks. We're going to try to start about a minute or two early. No, we're not. Can't do it? We can do it? Okay, Zach says we can do it. So we now have official approval. Welcome to the Science Group, and welcome to Chautauqua if this is your first time. I'm Bob Spiritus. I coordinate these talks. Our president, Bob Hooper, is floating around with giving good cheer. We're always looking for speakers, and we're always looking to have people come back, of course, for other talks. But for today, we're very happy and lucky to have Judi Greenwald. She received a BS in Engineering cum laude from Princeton, an MA in Science, Technology, and Public Policy from George Washington University. And she's the president and CEO of the Nuclear Innovation Alliance, which does advocacy and research, for new nuclear energy as an energy security and climate solution. She has decades of policy leadership in this area, including working in the for the U.S. Congress, the White House, the Environmental Protection Agency, Department of Energy, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions. She also worked on the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments as a congressional committee staff, overseeing energy and environmental programs, co-founding the Carbon Capture Coalition, advising U.S. state and regional greenhouse gas initiatives, and collaborating with stakeholders to advance both economic and environmental goals. So she knows her stuff, and she's going to share that information with us, and hope that you enjoy this, and that you have a good day here at Chautauqua. Judi, please take over.
I've never in my life had to raise a mic. I always have to lower it. Can people hear me if I don't lower it? Excellent. Okay. No, I think, can people hear me? Yes. Yes. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much, Bob, for that kind introduction. I'm from New York originally, so I'm going to talk fast, and I'm also going to try to cover a lot of ground, at least lightly, so that people from all different perspectives and knowledge levels can learn something today. So a little bit on politics and public opinion, why nuclear, technology and safety, cost, waste, and end with some key takeaways. And I'll leave as much time as I can for questions. We're definitely going to end at 10:15 sharp because people need to run over. I guess a lot of us can't run anymore. A lot of us need to get over to hear Ken Burns. So I'll try to make sure we do that. And want to leave time for questions because people always have questions about nuclear. Okay, so setting the stage, just so you know, I run the Nuclear Innovation Alliance. As Bob said, we are a little think and do tank. Think means we do the research and analysis. Do means we do advocacy, we do education, we do convening. And our mission is to help create the conditions for success for new nuclear energy so it can play a major role as an energy security and climate solution. And so we're a pro-nuclear NGO, which is a relatively new thing in the world. We've been around for about 10 years, and historically, if you met someone who was working in an NGO on nuclear, likely it was anti-nuclear. Now there are more and more of us who are working on nuclear because we are funded by philanthropy, so we're interested in nuclear from the public interest. We don't have any commercial interest in nuclear. We do work with industry, we work with all kinds of stakeholders, but we are working on nuclear energy in the public interest. And so what do I mean when we say our mission? Actually, I didn't say. Our mission is to help create the conditions for success for new nuclear. What do I mean by that? Bottom half of the chart, which I don't know how well you can see, so I'll narrate it. Success means competitive cost, getting to market, public acceptance, and scaling. And we need demos in the 2020s and commercialization in the 2030s if we want to solve our energy security and climate problems. We're in a hurry to address climate change, so we want to move as quickly as possible. What do these conditions, how do you get to conditions for success? So in the United States, the way we do energy commercialization and innovation is it's private sector led and it's government enabled. Other countries are different. There are some countries that do everything via state-owned enterprises. That's kind of not how we roll, although there is some interest currently in changing that. But at the moment, it's this kind of messy mix of public and private actions, and you really need both. And a lot of it's on industry, and the government and civil society have an important role in the early years of getting early mover projects and sort of getting things rolling. And then eventually you want this to be, at least in our country, a successful private enterprise. And so what some of these things look like, what we work on to how do we achieve these conditions for success, and I'll go from the right to the left. So we work a lot on, oh, okay. So on the right vertical is private investment. That's something we work on a lot. We educate potential investments on what the nuclear energy opportunity is, what different types of technologies are. We're trying to attract investment broadly to the sector. We're not interested in any particular technology, but just broadly to make the sector successful. Then in the middle column is this federal and state policy. And like I mentioned, this is how we do things in this country for a lot of technologies. So if you think about how did wind and solar get successful, there was a lot of federal research and development, there were tax credits, there were a lot of state renewable portfolio standards, which is a requirement that state utilities purchase a certain amount of renewables, and all of these things work together with a lot of private investment so that you could actually get to the point where now wind and solar have come down a lot in costs and they're quite competitive. We actually did the same thing for fracking, for better or for worse. There was a lot of federal R&D on what was then called unconventional gas extraction, and then there were public and private partnerships and tax credits for getting unconventional gas, and now, of course, you have fracking is very competitive, and we have very cheap, again, for better or for worse, natural gas. The left vertical is regulatory modernization. That is somewhat unique in what we have to do for new nuclear. I think there's broadly, or I know there's broadly a lot of work on permitting reform that you may have heard about. We have to get more efficient at doing permitting while still not cutting corners. In nuclear energy, that's an issue as well, but the specific issue for new nuclear is that a lot of the rules that we have at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission have become tailored to conventional nuclear technology. And so we need the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to open up more and be open to new technologies and enable them to make their safety case to the regulators. So we need more risk-informed, the way we describe it is risk-informed, performance-based, and technology-inclusive regulation. And that's what we spend a lot of time working on. There's actually a lot of progress happening at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission on that. So shifting into the political conversation a bit, I don't know how well you can see this, so I'll narrate for you. This is, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, this is 2 pictures worth 2,000 words. And so the title of the slide is Nuclear Energy Conversation Has Shifted Dramatically. The picture on the left-hand side is from 1981. For the picture on the right-hand side is from 2022. They're both outside the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant in California. On the left-hand side, you have young people carrying signs. On the right-hand side, you have young people carrying signs. On the left-hand side, the signs say shut down the nuclear power plant. And on the right-hand side, they say save Diablo Canyon for the clean energy. So the world has changed quite a bit. And if you can remember this visual, you'll know more about the politics of nuclear energy than pretty much anyone. And just as an aside, the woman who led the protest in favor of Diablo Canyon is a woman named Isabel Bomicki. If you're interested, she's a social media influencer. Still not quite sure exactly what that means she does all day. And she's great. She makes all these videos that you can see online. Her online name is Isodope. Some of you will get that pun. And she does little videos like of explaining how fission works using gummy bears to represent uranium pellets. And she also has a great TED Talk. So what a difference 40 years makes. This is also probably a little hard to see, but the darker line is how support has gone up and down a bit in the United States, public support more broadly. The public support was 60% in '95, and it's back up at 61 again in 2025 with some ups and downs. And this has been important, but most people, if you ask about nuclear, they don't know that much, so these are generally not that strongly held feelings. The slide I showed you before is the more interesting thing, because it was the sort of hardcore anti-nuclear movement that really paused us on nuclear in many ways, and now that's reversing, and that sort of small population, as so often happens in our politics, is what's super important. But it has bounced around, and it's pretty high right now. The other super interesting thing about nuclear politics is that it's really bipartisan. There are very few things right now that are bipartisan, but nuclear is bipartisan. And I don't know if you can see on the right-hand side, but nuclear, we have about 52% of Democrats, the Democrats are in blue, and 69% of Republicans like nuclear. So there's majorities in both parties. Whereas for most of the different kinds of energy, you have a minority in one party and a majority in the other. Solar is an exception, so I think we may be okay on solar, but some people are working really hard to make that more partisan again. But in general, nuclear is especially bipartisan, and that is super important because, and this is a scatter plot, which I don't know how well you can see on the right side, and the first scatter plot on the upper left corner is from 1949, and the last one is 2011, and it's gotten even more polarized since then. And what this is each dot is a representative of Congress. The blue dots are Dems, the red dots are Republicans. And throughout, for many decades, you had a pretty, like a big mush. And you had a lot of red dots on the right-hand side. This is the political spectrum, is the horizontal line. So this is ideologically to the right, ideologically to the left. But there was kind of a strong spectrum with a lot of people in the center and some overlap between the parties. But then starting in the 90s, and this is 2011, and it's gotten even worse, the center hollowed out, and you really have all the dots for the Republicans on the right, all the dots for the Democrats on the left, and hardly anybody in the center. And it used to be that when we legislated, and I know a lot about this because I worked for Congress in the 90s, we used to legislate from the center. So you would sort of get centrists together, they'd figure out a solution to something, they'd sort of pull in people from the right and left, and then you would have durable legislation. Now it doesn't work that way. You have to pull from both sides, people who generally don't agree on anything. And the solutions that seem to have some success right now are things that people like for different reasons. So they'll like the same thing, but it's for very different reasons. And this is why nuclear is doing pretty well right now, because you have Republicans, for the most part, more interested in certain aspects of nuclear, and Democrats more interested in others. So a little bit about these benefits that people are interested in. So I'm going to start with, this is kind of the key to understanding why a lot of us like nuclear energy. Nuclear energy has high energy density. And energy density is the amount of energy stored within a given substance per unit of volume or mass. And so this is fuel energy density in megajoules per kilogram. And this is sugar, the first one on the left, if you can't see my little pointer. Coal is 24, fat is 39, gasoline is 46, and uranium is 76 million. So you just get so much energy out of this teeny little bit of uranium, and this is, of course, for those of you who are more geeky, this is because E equals mc squared. You take a little bit of energy, and you get a little bit of mass, and you get an enormous amount of energy. So this amount of energy from this very, very small amount of mass is kind of the secret of why there's so many benefits to nuclear energy. Nuclear reactions release no greenhouse gases or air pollution, and that's from the power plants themselves. As well, nuclear energy releases the least life cycle greenhouse gases if you look at the whole life cycle, from getting the fuel to all the way to dealing with the waste. And this is nuclear on the very left-hand side. This is life cycle greenhouse gas emission ranges for different energy sources, grams of carbon dioxide per kilowatt hour, so nuclear is best on this metric. Onshore wind, offshore wind, solar, PV, solar CSP, hydropower, natural gas with carbon capture, coal with carbon capture, natural gas without carbon capture, and coal without carbon capture. So nuclear is very, very good on the greenhouse gas metric. Nuclear energy is also firm and highly reliable. This is more why, for example, the Trump administration really likes it. They care less about the climate aspects. And a metric of this is capacity factor. That's the ratio of the power plant's actual electricity output to the theoretical maximum output if it ran at full capacity 24/7 year-round. And so in the US, our capacity factors for our fleet of nuclear power plants is 93%, geothermal 70%, natural gas close to 60% or 59%, coal 42%, hydro 34%, wind 33.5%, and solar 23%. So it's very reliable. You can count on it when you need it. Nuclear energy is also one of the safest forms of electricity generation. Hardly anybody knows this. This is mortality by electricity source, deaths from accidents, and air pollution per terawatt hour generated. And this includes everything, all the bad stuff you've heard about nuclear, it's all wrapped into it. And solar is the safest, then comes nuclear, then wind, hydropower, gas, biomass, oil, coal, and brown coal. So it is extremely safe, even if you include the downsides. Nuclear energy also has the highest life cycle land use efficiency of any energy source. And this is in land use efficiency of energy for different energy sources, megawatt hours per acre, direct and indirect land use. This is nuclear, and the first one on the left, and this is everybody else, geothermal, wind, other kind of wind down here. It's just amazingly different. And this is why sort of early, getting back a little bit to the politics, the sort of earliest environmental groups, some people call these environmental groups, were the conservation groups, they were the sort of first ones who turned around on nuclear. So I have somebody from the Nature Conservancy on my advisory committee. They got super interested because they want to preserve land for wildlife and other purposes. So the idea that the fact that nuclear is so land efficient, we take up so little land, then we can use our land for other things, including protection of wildlife and natural resources, as well as everything else that we want to use land for. The waste generated per unit of electricity production is also quite low. This is quantity. We're going to get into the risks from nuclear waste, which we do have to manage that. And if you don't want to touch nuclear waste, but it's very, very small quantities. So this is kilograms of waste per megawatt hour, and waste for solar and wind is in the form of panels and turbine blades that have to be disposed of. Coal is mostly coal ash. Nuclear is mostly spent or unprocessed fuel. This is coal waste, the left-hand side. This is solar, this is wind and nuclear. So tiny amounts of waste. It's bad stuff. You got to keep away from it, but it's really, really small amounts. If you put all the waste, if you use all of your energy from nuclear your whole life, the amount of waste that you produce would fit in a soda can. So it's just very, very, very small amounts. Nuclear also has economic and jobs benefits, and they tend to be concentrated around where the power plant is. So communities right around the power plant tend to really love their nuclear plants. They create a lot of jobs. They're highly skilled jobs. They're highly unionized. It's one of the most highly unionized sector in industry, creates a lot of jobs and a lot of economic development, very good for the tax base. So you find nuclear opposition not in the communities, but it tends to be a bit of a donut. So people who are a bit away from the plant and are nervous about it from afar, and then people way far from the nuclear plant don't know about it. But the people who are right near a plant tend to really be very supportive of the plant. So this is kind of a summary of a lot of the things I said. This is from a chart that actually was under the Department of Energy, produced this under the Biden administration, so it's a couple of years old. And this says nuclear energy provides a multifaceted value proposition. The dark green is high, the yellowish green is medium, and low is gray. And nuclear is the top line. Is it clean? This is what they say on top are the attributes. Nuclear, is it clean? And South Africa. So it's kind of all over the world, but we at the moment have the most nuclear, and China and Russia are most rapidly advancing. So a little bit about technology. Nuclear reactions release energy stored in the bonds of the nucleus of an atom. The two main types are fusion and fission. Probably should have said this at the beginning, but I focus on fission. We do a little bit of fusion, also can answer questions about that if you like. We focus more on fission because we think it's nearer term, but fusion is a really exciting opportunity and it has a lot of benefits. We just don't do a lot of work on that right now at the Nuclear Innovation Alliance, although we have in the past and we could. So the left-hand side is what fusion looks like. It's two smaller atoms, generally hydrogen. They fuse and they form helium and a lot of energy. And then the right-hand side is fission. You start with a big atom, generally uranium. There are also some other atoms you can start with, and it forms smaller atoms and releases a lot of energy. And just to give a sense, for a chemical combustion reaction, you might get 4 electron volts, nuclear fusion 17 million electron volts, and nuclear fission 200 million. So the fission releases neutrons and energy, and what happens is the neutrons go in and they bombard these large unstable atoms, and then they break up into smaller atoms, and then they also release a bunch of new neutrons. These are the little ends, which I don't know if you can see. And then those neutrons go and they hit other large atoms and they form more reactions, and this is called a chain reaction. And this is what's going on inside the reactor, and then what we do is we harness that energy to produce power, heat, and other things we need. A little bit about conventional nuclear technologies. They generally convert this energy from the nuclear reactions into usable electricity, steam, and process heat. So you start with a nuclear reaction, then you produce the heat, use the heat to produce steam, use the steam to produce electricity. More and more, there's interest in using nuclear power not just to produce electricity, but also hydrogen production and district heating from the steam. District heating is when you sort of pipe around heat into a complex of buildings. Industrial processes, we can use the heat because some of the newer designs in particular produce very high temperature heat, and you can use that for industrial processes. I think my climate friend knows decarbonizing industrial processes is a huge problem, so this is one of the potential solutions for how you can use low carbon energy to produce heat. Thermal energy storage is also important, and then for electricity, we're not only looking at the power grid, which is what historically we've been doing, but we're also starting to look more at off-grid applications as well as desalination. This is an example of what a nuclear reactor looks like. This is the North Anna Nuclear Generating Station in Mineral, Virginia. As you can see, it's a big complex, but it produces a lot of energy, probably as much as 1 million or 2 million solar roofs. I mean, this is just a lot of energy on this footprint. Talking a little bit, segueing to new nuclear reactor technologies, and I'll do a little comparison of conventional and new. Conventional new nuclear energy are predominantly large. They're generally more than 1,000 megawatts electric, so they're different on reactor size. And then they're predominantly light water. They use light water as the moderator. The moderator is the substance that slows down the neutrons so that they can actually have these reactions. Also, they use certain types of fuels. I'll get to that in a second. And they also use light water as both the coolant and the moderator. And that's what we have with conventional. I think maybe I'll go to all of these so I'll go faster. So the reactor sizes that I just mentioned, that's what is conventional, is about 1,000. The new nuclear energy are much more versatile. Some of them are really tiny. They're microreactors. I guess they're not really tiny compared to like a solar roof, but they're tiny for nuclear, so less than 30 megawatts. And they go up to about 300 megawatts, which is kind of the size of about a natural gas plant, but generally not as large as the conventional nuclear, but some of them are. And then on this technology, we have a wide variety of reactor technologies using different fuel forms, different moderators, different substances. So there's a lot going on there. And then on the generation type, generally the conventional reactors have been used primarily firm or baseload generation. And then new nuclear energy, we have more opportunities to do flexible and dispatchable generation. That means you can call on it anytime and it can be used more or less. And then conventional nuclear systems are designed with active safety systems. That means there has to be, if something goes wrong at an existing nuclear reactor, you have to have some type of active intervention. We think that the current fleet is quite safe, but you do have to have this active intervention. The new generation relies much more on passive or inherent safety systems. So for example, there's a new fuel type called TRISO, and the uranium is embedded in layers and layers of ceramics. So the fuel actually can't melt, so you can't have a meltdown. There's also a lot of these technologies where instead of having pumps that are driven by electricity for their emergency core cooling system. So that means that if the pump fails mechanically, or if your power fails and you can't run your pump, you have trouble with your emergency core cooling system. A lot of the new designs have things like the water is located above the reactor and then gravity has the water come down into the reactor to cool it, or the reactor is sitting in a pool of water, or the reactor is sitting underground so that the heat dissipates into the ground. So there's just a lot of many, many different designs that are just rethinking safety. And this is one of the key reasons why we think you need Nuclear Regulatory Commission reform, because we want different and new designs to be able to make that safety case to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and not have a checkbox. You know, does your pump work? Well, I don't have a pump. You know, we want to make sure that it's a new, open way of thinking about these new set of designs. They still have to be safe. That analysis has to be done carefully. We still need a very competent Nuclear Regulatory Commission that we can trust, but it's different. This is examples of the way we're using nuclear in some of these early mover projects. We have a resource on our website if you're interested on all the early mover projects around the country. In the US, there are about 20-something. The numbers keep increasing, and these are just some examples of particular applications that are happening now. We have on the left-hand side the Westinghouse AP1000 that's being used for firm electricity generation. It's a big plant. It's much more like the conventional ones, but it's got these passive safety systems, so it's considered new. The second one is replacing retiring fossil fuel plants. This is a plant that TerraPower, which is Bill Gates' company, in case people are interested, and he's got the Natrium reactor, and that's a 100 to 500 megawatt range reactor, and the reason is it's got storage combined in it. It's got molten salt storage, sort of like what we do with concentrating solar power, so you can create more electricity, then store it in the molten storage, and then bring it back when the grid needs it, if the grid doesn't need all the power you're producing. And this is replacing a retiring coal power plant in Wyoming. Industrial decarbonization example, this is an X-Energy project at the Dow Chemical facility in Texas. If this works out, Dow wants to put this everywhere. The plant is going to create heat and power for chemical processes, and Dow's got a lot of facilities all over the world, so this is an exciting project. There's also a lot going on with microreactors in remote, yes?
Do you know what the total investment for each of those projects will be when completed?
I don't offhand, but I can get that for you after, yeah. It's a lot. For the BWXT is doing microreactors for the Defense Department, and also there's a lot of interest in microreactors at military bases, in military operations, also just in remote locations for power, like there's a lot of interest in Alaska in microreactors. And then this one is Kairos Power. They are building a test reactor, and they also have an agreement to build to produce power for data centers. It's so funny to write about data centers now. Nuclear plants, I think, are actually more popular than data centers right now. So saying that that it's going to support a data center, I may sort of take this off my slide. But there's huge power demand from data centers. They need power 24/7, so nuclear is a good match. They don't always need the very large ones, so these sort of medium ones are an interesting match, and they need a lot of power over time. And also the hyperscalers and these companies like Google have very deep pockets, so they can be important early investors, which is interestingly the same role they played with solar and wind. They bought a lot of power early on and helped develop the demand for a lot of these new technologies. So there's a lot of exciting things happening with the IT sector. Dozens of companies are working to deploy their reactors across the US and overseas. And this is kind of our competitive advantage at the moment in the United States, is that we have this ecosystem of new nuclear developers, a lot of innovative ideas happening. They have a startup culture. A lot of these are smaller companies. Some are very large companies that just have an innovative nuclear division. This is also a relatively new thing for the nuclear industry. The nuclear industry historically was not known as being particularly entrepreneurial or innovative. You know, came out of the military. A lot of the people who are involved in it are come out of nuclear navy, or they work at utilities, and you know, it's much more of a stable, a lot of the emphasis on stability, not so much on innovation. So there's a whole disruption going on with all these different companies, and it's because of this vibrant industrial ecosystem and competition that we in the United States have a competitive edge, at least at the moment, for this next generation of nuclear energy, and are hopeful that this will be something that we can be globally competitive in and export these technologies and also produce them and use them at home, whereas the conventional technologies, it's playing catch up with Russia and China at the moment. These are some recent agreements with the AI and data center types with nuclear power companies. A little bit about the investment on the right side. So Amazon on this right-hand side is making a $500 million investment in X Energy, but that's not going to cover too many plants where it'll be sort of partial, and then the government at the moment is putting in money for these early mover projects. But ultimately, we think that these will be competitive. The middle one is interesting because this is the restart of 3 Mile Island. As many people know, there was an accident at 3 Mile Island in the 70s. Unit 2 was the one that had the accident. Unit 1 actually did not have the accident and was not damaged. And fairly shortly after Unit 2 went down, Unit 1 went back on and was operating for 20 years. Most people don't know that. There was this reactor at TMI. It was operating perfectly well. And then in the 2010s, because of economic reasons, it just wasn't competitive in the electricity market, it shut down. And fortunately for us, they never decommissioned it. It was just kind of in stall mode. And they're now able to go back and restart it. And oh, I don't have that. This is how much it's going to add to GDP, is 16 billion. I think I have, it's in the order of billions for the investment, which is a lot of money, but it's not a lot for a power plant. And this is a huge amount of power. So they're going to restart this Unit 1 at 3 Mile Island. They're changing the name of it for obvious reasons. It's going to be called the Crane Clean Energy Center, and it's a lot of power, and we can get it really quickly. This is something you can bring on quickly. And there's a few power plants around the country which shut down for economic reasons. We're not yet fully decommissioned, and we can actually bring them online for some cost. It's not a huge universe, but it's there's a few of them, and it's a lot of energy. A little bit about costs. Historically, U.S. nuclear power plants had escalating costs and slower schedules over time, which is not what you want. And that was tied to a lack of standardized and replicated reactor designs. So I don't know if you can see this scale, but this is 1950 on the left, 1908, use my glasses, 1980, that doesn't look right. Okay, 1950 to 1980. And these sort of scatter plots, the costs were sort of coming down, and then they got here, and then they started to go up a lot. And a lot of this is because we didn't replicate the same design. We kept starting again with a new design. And unlike, for example, France, which has their fleet is almost all the same design, and then you can learn by doing as you get more and more designs. We didn't do that, and we just kept getting worse. And there were a whole bunch of other things that happened. We got sort of bad at project management. This issue of project management of very large projects is actually a big deal. It's not just a problem for nuclear. This is a book I highly recommend for anyone. It's not mostly about nuclear. It's called How Big Things Get Done, and it's by Bent Flyberg, and he has a database of like 10,000 mega projects, which he calls projects of $1 billion or more. And he says 95% of large projects of any type go over budget and behind schedule. And so what he does is he looks at this database and he looks at the 5% of projects that do well and tries to figure out actually what went right and tries to use those lessons to advise people about how to build projects better. And the nuclear is the second worst in his database. The projects tend to come in at 120% over time and over budget, but the absolute worst is Olympic stadiums. They always come in over budget and over time. And there's a lot going on here, and a big thing, and this is true of Olympic stadiums, you sort of just probably know this intuitively, is that there's this huge incentive to underestimate the costs so that you can get the project, right? You say, oh, we can do the Olympics for this amount of money, and then of course it's way, way more. And so that's a big part of it, but there's lots of other things. And so we're looking at all these things that Flyberg and others have looked at about how you make project management go better and applying them to nuclear, and that's how we're going to bring the cost down over time. And when I say we, it's people in the civil sector, but it's mostly in industry that this is happening, as well as government. So across the bottom are these key cost drivers that we're working on, which are very aligned with what Flyberg found. So in particular, Flyberg says you should plan slow and build fast. Huge issue. A lot of times people rush to build, and then when you're building, you're incurring a lot of costs, particularly on a capital-intensive project like nuclear, because you have to invest all this money, you have to borrow a lot of money, and you're paying financing costs while you're not building if you're building slowly. You have to put a lot of construction workers in place, a lot of technology, people who are very well paid and well skilled, and so if you stretch out the construction time, you can waste a lot of money. So the key thing is to get everything in place first, make sure you have a completed design before you build. This has been a big issue in nuclear where they sort of are designing as they go, not such a good idea. So that's a big piece of where we're gonna get cost reductions. Also learning by doing, and this is related to standardization. If we can get standardization, we can replicate instead of starting from scratch each time, and just reducing the time and being much more organized about project management. Also, supply chain build out is very important, and modularization is really important. So the idea is that right now, pretty much reactors, especially in the US, are just stick-built on site, and they're each bespoke. And instead, we want to get this modularization where you can buy components, you can build them in a factory, get these economies of multiples instead of economies of scale. I should note that we build nuclear plants big for a reason. You do get economies of scale, but this construction management issue is just so huge that it's overwhelming. So instead, if we can modularize and actually build and assemble components on site instead of building from scratch, that'll make a huge difference. And then there's a bunch of other categories. We know this can be done because other countries are doing better than the US on this, in particular Russia and China. Korea is really good at building reactors on time and on budget, so there are other countries who can be models for this. A little bit of a summary on nuclear, on just sort of the whole economic piece. So nuclear offers long-term value, but electricity markets prioritize short-term returns, and that's why we saw some plants retiring in the 2010s because they couldn't compete in competitive electricity markets. So nuclear power reduces the system cost for the whole electricity system, but it has this large upfront capital investment. Decarbonization is less expensive with nuclear energy and other dispatchable low-carbon sources. This is what I've done a lot of my career, is modeling of the whole energy system, trying to figure out how you get everything you need out of the energy system. You have to minimize costs and make sure it's reliable and make sure we have enough supply to meet demand, and you have to take into account what the whole system looks like. And when you try to do that and also get carbon emissions way down, you really find that you need a zero carbon firm resource like nuclear, and that's the one we have the most confidence that we can scale. Stable capacity, long-term reliability, and decarbonization benefits of nuclear are not valued properly. We don't have, for example, a carbon price in this country where you'd actually value economically the carbon benefits of nuclear. So you have to kind of make the case for other reasons if you're trying to attract private investment. And so nuclear plants retired, as I mentioned, for economic reasons in the 2010s, and now, of course, we have to either restart them or replace them to meet growing demand. And here's another example of a restart. This is Palisades Nuclear Plant in Michigan, retired in 2018. It's undergoing a restart refurbishment, and that costs $1.5 to $2 billion. Again, a lot of money, but not a lot of money for a nuclear plant. And it's because of all this, because the market isn't by itself going to pick up these nuclear projects, and especially for these early years, the early mover projects, that's why we still need a lot of policy, particularly to get these early mover projects going. And all of the early mover projects that I showed earlier, there's some type of public-private partnership or some type of public policy that's combined with private investment to make sure that there's private investment, because you want to make sure there is a private case for it ultimately, but you need that public investment to get us over the hump for the early mover projects. Nuclear waste. Typical discussions around nuclear waste can portray an unmanaged and unsolvable problem. So this is the mutated fish Binky from The Simpsons, and then this is a illustration from World Atlas Nuclear on nuclear waste. In case people didn't know, these are not real. These are pictures and people's imagination. So this, a lot of people have this in their head, but it's actually not an accurate picture of what's happening with waste. So the reality is that radiation poses real risks, And you really want to make sure that you keep people away from this nuclear waste that is highly radioactive. But we are very good at preventing exposure through careful tracking, monitoring, and management from production to storage to disposal. When I took a toxicology course many, many years ago, the first thing they taught us was that the dose makes the poison. So you can have something that's really bad for you, but if you don't expose anyone to it, then you don't have to, you've reduced the problem, you've managed the problem. So the key thing is to not let people get exposed to the radiation. The situation we have is most of the waste is low-level waste, that's about 94%, and then that's the green, and the intermediate is the yellow, and high-level waste, which is the problem that we're most concerned about, is this blue sliver. Like I mentioned, it's small quantities, but it's nasty stuff. And then on the right-hand shows what we do with low-level radioactive waste, which is similar to what we do with hazardous and non-hazardous waste landfills. You make sure they're buried and that they're sealed, and you keep them away from people. But it's not a high exposure. They're not very highly radioactive, so you can actually manage them well, and we do a good job on that. Current spent fuel management, like I mentioned, it's small quantities, easy to detect, careful industry practices, and strict NRC, Nuclear Regulatory Commission oversight. That's what you have to have. You can't be dismissive of the waste problem, but you have to really carefully manage it, and we do that. So you start with the fuel that comes out of the reactor. This is a spent fuel rod. Some of the new fuels don't look like this, but this is a conventional one. And then it comes out really hot and radioactive. We put it in a pool, kind of like a swimming pool, for a couple of years for it to cool off. Then it goes into dry casks. There's a guy at the bottom of the cask. You can get a sense of the size. These are very, very safe, very sturdy casks. They throw them off of buildings. They try to burn them, all kinds of things. They will last at least 100 years. And at the moment, they are sitting at power plants around the country on site, and we're okay for 100 years, but it's not a permanent solution, and we do need a permanent solution. And so what does the permanent solution look like? We actually know what to do, it's just hard to actually do it in practice. We have to create deep geological repositories, and that's a longer-term political and social issue here. The good news is that Finland is way ahead of us. They have an Onkalo repository. It's expected it's a permanent repository underground. It's expected to start accepting waste later in 2026 or early 2027. And they took a very different approach from the US. In the US, what we did, unfortunately, is we spent about 50 years, maybe 40 years, trying to put the waste in Nevada permanently, and Nevada didn't want it. And so this has just been over and over again, the definition of insanity, trying to do the same thing over and over again, and it just has never worked. They don't want it, and it's just been politically impossible. And what Finland did is they actually did a consent-based siting process where they said, who wants this? And actually, Onkalo and others volunteered. And the reason that Onkalo volunteered is they have other nuclear businesses that are related. So it's not that all they have is a repository. They have a nuclear power plant, they have fuel manufacturing facilities, they have a lot of business around it. So it's an economic development complex that includes a repository. So what the Trump administration did recently is they did a request for proposals for life cycle innovation campuses, which are you asking states not just to accept a permanent repository, but to accept a whole life cycle innovation campus where it would have power plants and fuel processing and fuel production and a lot of good high-paying jobs as well as a repository. And interestingly, a lot of states volunteered, and they just recently down-selected, and it looks like it's going to be a competition among Utah, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Idaho. This is not a done deal. They still need legislation because our current legislation says we have to put it in Nevada, even though Nevada doesn't want it. And so this is going to take, Congress is going to have to act. The states, we're going to have to actually have a down selection. The state's going to actually have to commit. There's a lot of work to be done here, but we're started down, in our view, at a much better road than we have for a long time. And interestingly, we're following Finland, which I doubt the administration has ever mentioned. So, 5 fast takeaways on new nuclear energy. Oh. Yeah, so you, Yeah, okay. So 5 fast takeaways. Nuclear energy can play a major role in creating a clean energy economy. New nuclear reactors have many public benefits. New nuclear reactors have a wide array of different commercial use cases. Continued government role in new reactor early mover projects is critical to bring costs down. We have to get these early mover projects have to be both publicly and privately funded. And careful industry management, government oversight, and responsible reform at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission are essential, and we actually have to make sure that we do this right. You don't want to get this wrong. And with that, I'm ready to take questions.
So most of you know the drill. Come up to the microphone, speak into the microphone, and please ask a question.
Is this on or is good morning. Thank you for a very good review. Is there a clean definition of what new nuclear means, or is it just current nuclear that's improved over multiple dimensions?
This is a great question. There are actually multiple definitions, and in fact, different statutes define it differently, so it's been a bit of a mess. We at the Nuclear Innovation Alliances, we define new nuclear as a technology that's substantially better in some way than conventional. So there's it's a pretty open definition, but there's so many different designs. I mean, we have dozens of new reactor designs, and they all have some different attributes. And there are, these large light water reactors that we consider new nuclear because they have passive and inherent safety. So like the Vogtle plant that just got built, which is now the largest power plant in the country, largest zero carbon emitting power plant, first plant that we finished in like 30 years. And that one we consider new nuclear, even though it's a light water reactor, because it's got the passive and inherent safety. And that's Georgia? Yeah, that's the one in Georgia.
In 1954, the chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission said nuclear power was going to be too cheap to meter. And despite the law in 1957, the Price-Anderson Act that subsidizes if something happens, Lazard that publishes a report every year on levelized cost of energy. One came out 3 weeks ago saying solar, wind, geothermal batteries are the cheapest source of energy, not to mention you've got to guard nuclear waste for 1 to 3 centuries and keep it underground for 10,000 to 100,000 years. So just economically, it hasn't penciled out. So I know you appear to be in favor of it, but economically it's not working out. And SMRs are vaporware at this point. Nobody knows if they're going to be cheaper. I mean, that's always been the promise of nuclear electricity.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a longer conversation, but I would say that nuclear has penciled out. We get 20% of our electricity from it, and particularly now, we're actually restarting plants that we had shut down. So it actually can pencil out, and certainly other countries it's penciling out, and we in the United States can do better on it. And I think it's really important to differentiate between the early mover projects that are quite expensive, as were the early mover solar and wind projects. And the point is to sort of get to the point where we build them in multiples and we standardize them and we can get back down to reasonable costs. The other thing is that when you look at what is it called, life cycle? No, levelized cost of electricity, which is the metric that we usually use. That is not a great metric for nuclear. What happens when you add some type of generating source to an electric system, if you only look at levelized cost of energy, then you won't adequately build for reliability and the system. And so nuclear has enormous system benefits, and those are not captured in levelized cost of energy. And so we find a lot that if you don't include the sort of anchor technologies, you're not going to be okay. So what's happening now is to get that anchor, the firm energy, we're using natural gas, which emits carbon, and so we need some type of firm energy, otherwise we're not going to be able to run our electricity, and we need it to be clean and firm. There's a lot of interest in storage, and we're very excited about the work that's going on storage, but it's not there yet for long-term storage, so you can't really count on wind and solar because of night and changing winds. So you need wind and solar in our view, but you can't have only wind and solar. And if we try to do it only with wind and solar, and I can send you some stuff on this, we've done some modeling, and the Nature Conservancy has done a lot of modeling. If you try to build out the whole system, if you want to be clean, actually, if you don't care about clean, we have less of a problem, you can do a lot of gas. But if you want it to be clean, and you try to do it all with wind and solar, because they have these low capacity factors and they take up a lot of land, you wind up using ridiculous amounts of land to actually try to get to deep decarbonization. So if you want, we can dig in on the modeling sometime, or I can send you some stuff, but we really need nuclear from a public perspective, and we really can do nuclear from an economic perspective based on the experience in other countries. What we've done before, we used to be able to build these things pretty well. We can do it again. Yes?
So I'm going to use TMI as an example. There's a lot of water going through cooling the system. It went into Susquehanna, and it upset the ecosystem all the way down to the Chesapeake. What's being done today to mitigate that?
Yeah, so cooling water is definitely an issue you can use a lot. Some of these designs don't use water as a coolant, so that's helpful. Some of these designs have dry cooling systems, which is also helpful. So the next generation, I think, is going to be much better on the water piece, but it is a real issue, and you have to make sure that when you site a nuclear plant, you have adequate water and that you're actually making sure that that's not a problem. And there's a lot of mitigation measures you can make in terms of adjusting the temperature before you let it out into the environment, but you do want to keep an eye on the water, and that's super important. Yes.
That's great, because I had two questions, and that was one of them. So I'm from San Diego, and we shut down San Onofre because of some tubes that they built wrong. Apparently, that's what they tell us in the general public. And I was just wondering why that wasn't worth retubing it again.
So I think you're sort of seeing, like, in your state, what has happened, this sort of recent history. There was just a lot of us, and it's, in the whole community, the whole world, the policy world, the public world, we were just saying, let's move away from nuclear and use other types of technologies. And so that was part of it. Oh, you wouldn't want to fix up that old technology that nobody likes. Now it's completely changed. We actually want to keep these reactors online. We do fairly a lot of work, like a lot of, the way you get a license from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is you get a 40-year license, and then you can get a 20-year extension, and then you can get a 20-year extension again. And we have a number of plants now that are getting their second 20-year extension. So the whole vibe has shifted because of this combination of wanting it for climate, wanting it for the reliability, wanting it for our power projections now of what we're going to need because of IT and other reasons are just growing immensely. So we need a lot of power. A lot of us want it to be clean power, and so there's just a lot more interest in keeping the plants going, making sure they're safe, obviously, or maybe not so obviously. It's obvious to us, and we advocate for that. And the whole approach has changed. I think I should probably say this more explicitly if I haven't. What made the issue more bipartisan recently was really climate. I think we always had pretty strong support from Republicans because of the, and broadly, not everyone, because of the reliability benefits and energy security, because it was our technology. But more and more Democrats come around because of climate, really want to make sure that we actually have this option and we can actually decarbonize. Yes.
I grew up in Chautauqua County and worked for a number of years in the Southern Tier. My memory tells me that there was a storage site in West Valley that the government intervened in and came in to clean up. And I understand that process was encapsulating, actually I understood that it was kind of incorporating nuclear waste into a glass structure. And then you couldn't escape from the structure of the glass, and they disposed of it that way. Is that, I'm curious what level, well, number one, is that correct? Am I remembering right? And number two, what level of waste would that be?
So I'm not sure, that might have been defense waste. Was it Defense Department waste?
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure either, so I'll look it up. So it's important to distinguish the waste legacy that we have from the Manhattan Project from commercial nuclear waste. They're sort of really different animals. What happened when we were building the bomb during World War II is we had sites all over the country that were part of the Manhattan Project that were at national labs. And we were in a very big hurry. We weren't really cognizant of the kind of risks that nuclear posed. A lot of people were not careful about radiation exposure, and it was just a race, and people felt it was existential. Produced a lot of waste, did not characterize it, did not dispose of it well, and we have sites kind of all over the country that have this sort of nasty waste, and what a lot of it is just keeping it in place. And, you know, this kind of making sure that it can't move, can't mobilize, can't get into groundwater, can't get anywhere. And so a lot of it is, you know, just sort of cementing it in so that nobody can get to it. And even characterizing the waste is dangerous. So we just sort of entomb it, basically. And so that's like a whole set of things. But what you described where it's called vitrification, where you actually take the waste and you make it into glass, that's what the French are doing. That's what they're going to do in the waste in Oncalo, and when they put it underground. And that's probably what we'll do for our permanent repository, but that hasn't been decided yet. There are a bunch of different methods where you just make sure that the waste can't get out of its container, and then there'll probably be a lot of defense in depth where you'll make sure it can't get out of its glass container, then you'll put it in casks, and then you'll put those casks underground, and you'll have to monitor it to make sure that nothing is leaking or getting out.
Thank you.
Can you talk about cold fusion? That was a big topic in the past. Cold fusion?
So I don't know much about cold fusion. I know about fusion. So there's a lot of excitement around fusion. Fusion used to be the technology that everybody said, oh, it's 50 years away, and it just kept being 50 years away. And somewhat similar to what's happening in fission, it used to be like there were a few national facilities and universities that worked on fusion, and it was like a big science project. And now you have a bunch of startup companies who are actually working on fusion to be commercial, and they're attracting a ton of investment. And it's a bit of a longer play, though. We think it'll take longer, because right now they're still trying to figure out technically if you can actually make this happen, because it's hard to actually make a fusion reaction. But so with fission, it's much more about a commercialization challenge to sort of make it so that it pencils out. But fusion is a bit further away. Cold fusion, I don't know much about. I don't think it can scale, I think, is the issue as far as I know.
Hi, who are the philanthropies that fund your organization and why? And the second part of my question is, could you talk about the process of sourcing the uranium that's used? Thank you.
So we are funded by the Spitzer Charitable Trust, the Arnold Foundation, the Hewlett Charitable Trust. I have a list, but it's mainly climate-interested funders. It's people who want to prevent climate change. And historically, the climate funders didn't really fund nuclear because they were more in this environmentalist camp and they wanted other things. And more of the funders are coming to nuclear as something we need for both energy security and climate change. And so more and more of, with sort of the more conventional environmental funders are funding us and others to work on nuclear energy. And then on uranium, it's interesting. Uranium comes from a lot of places, a lot of Eastern Europe, Canada. There's a global market for uranium. The tricky part is enriched uranium, and that gets into who's doing the enriching, and that's also, I said, there's a lot of things you have to do to uranium on the supply chain, and there are fewer sources who can get you enriched uranium, and you also have to be really careful about enrichment, because as many of you know, that's where the non-proliferation issues arise. reactors are not going to be a source of material for weapons. They're not in the right form. They're not enriched enough. But if you have enrichment capacity, that's what lets you, because the fuel that we use is like 3 to 5% enriched uranium now, and there's some of the new designs go up to like 19%. But a bomb, you need like 90%. So to get all of that enrichment, you need enrichment capacity, and that's.
One more quick question and a quick answer.
Oh, sorry.
All right, quickly, you mentioned that there needs to be policy changes to support the industry, and until recently, Congress has been afraid to, but that's changing. Specifically, what policy changes would have to come out to support it?
So a lot of it's going on and is now in implementation phase. So we have, for example, this Loan Programs Office at the Department of Energy, which was really important in doing solar and wind. They've changed the name to the Office of Energy Dominance Financing, sorry. And they are now lending money to nuclear plants. That's very helpful. There are tax credits. There are clean electricity tax credits. We were strong advocates for including nuclear in clean electricity tax credits, so they now count for that. There are a number of state policies you can do. There's these public-private partnerships where the Department of Energy selects certain projects and then does a partnership. A couple of the projects I showed that are underway, like the TerraPower project, the X-Energy project with Dow, are half funded by the federal government, half funded by private sector, and so that works. There's a lot of work to be done at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. There's something called the Advance Act, which pushed Nuclear Regulatory Commission harder on nuclear regulatory, on regulatory reform, and that is underway. That actually got a vote of 88-2 in the Senate. 10 senators were missing. The only senators who voted against it were Markey and Sanders. So overwhelmingly, the Congress is for nuclear regulatory reform. They don't want to do it badly, and this is something we work on a lot. We want to make sure that this administration, as it's implementing regulatory reform, also keeps its eyes on safety really importantly focused. So a lot of it's less about new legislation than in implementing the legislation we have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now you're all free to run and get in line for Ken Burns. Ken told me he would like you to support public broadcasting and to put some money in our basket on the way out. And next week, a great Chautauquan, Megan Collins, is going to be talking about our microclimate here.